You click to find out how Augustus stole an empire, and in the next few minutes, we're exposing the masterclass in manipulation that turned a republic into a one-man rule. Get ready to see the real architect of Rome's greatest deception. After Caesar's death, Rome was a bloodbath. But a young, sickly Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, didn't just survive. He conquered. Drawing from Suetonius's scandalous lives of the 12 Caesars, we'll uncover the cutthroat journey of how this seemingly unassuming figure outmaneuvered giants like Mark Antony. But here's the twist: Augustus didn't just win power, he pretended to give it back. He built an empire by convincing Rome he was restoring the Republic. How did he pull off this monumental lie for over 40 years? What shocking personal secrets did he use as leverage? We're diving into the psychological warfare and propaganda that cemented his legendary, yet deeply deceptive reign. No other account reveals the hidden layers of his genius for control like Suetonius. If you're fascinated by political genius, ancient intrigue, and how power is truly seized, you're in the right place. Stick around for the full story. And before we unravel Augustus's greatest deception, please hit that like button, comment with your thoughts on Rome's first emperor, and subscribe for more deep dives into history. D. Octavius Caesar Augustus. D. Octavius Caesar Augustus hailed from the distinguished Octavii family of Velatri. Proof of their prominence includes a street named after them and an altar dedicated to an Octavius who, when surprised by enemies during a sacrifice to Mars, hastily offered half-raw entrails on the altar before marching out to victory. This act inspired a law mandating similar rituals in future. The Octavii lineage was admitted to the Senate by Tarquinius Priscus and later ranked among patricians by Servius Tullius. Over time, the family switched to the plebeian order but was restored to patrician status by Julius Caesar. The first Octavius to hold office by popular vote was Caius Rufus, father of 2 sons, Gnaeus and Caius, whose descendants formed 2 branches with differing fortunes. Gnaeus's line held the highest state offices continuously, while Caius's line, leading to Augustus's father, remained equestrian until elevated by Augustus's father. Augustus's great-grandfather served as military tribune in the Second Punic War in Sicily under Aemilius Pappus. His grandfather held municipal offices and lived peacefully with a sizable inheritance. Augustus himself noted only that his family came from ancient, wealthy equestrian stock, his father being the first senator. Mark Antony scornfully claimed Augustus's paternal ancestors were a freedman ropemaker and a usurer. Cassius of Parma insulted Augustus as the son of a baker and usurer from Aricia. Augustus's father, Caius Octavius, grew up wealthy and distinguished, contrary to accusations that he was a moneylender or bribery agent. He held significant posts with distinction. After his praetorship, he governed Macedonia, defeating bandits linked to Spartacus and Catiline, agents used in a Senate commission. Cicero praised his just, resolute province administration, encouraging his brother Quintus to emulate Octavius's example in Asia. Before running for consul, Caius Octavius died suddenly, leaving daughters including the elder Octavia by Ancaria, and younger Octavia plus Augustus by Asia, daughter of Marcus Aetius Balbus and Julia, Julius Caesar's sister. Balbus's family hailed from Aricia, many senators among them, and was closely related to Pompey the Great. Mark Antony mocked Augustus's maternal line as African perfumers and bakers, while Cassius called him a lump of his mother's meal kneaded by a money changer of Nerulum from Aricia. Augustus was born during Cicero and Caius Antonius's consulship, September 23, at dawn on the Palatine Hill, at a site marked later with a chapel dedicated to him. The Senate consecrated the spot, granting it divine status, upon appeal by Caius Laetorius, a young patrician convicted of adultery. His nursery, still shown in Velatri suburbs, is a small pantry-like place regarded as sacred. Legend tells of a lodger thrown out by mysterious forces, struck with horror and stupefaction. As an infant, he bore the surname Thurinus, recalling family roots in Thurium or his father's early military success there. This name, once inscribed on a bronze statue, was mocked by Mark Antony but embraced by Augustus. He later assumed the names Caius Caesar, as per his great-uncle's will, and Augustus, bestowed in the Senate by Munatius Plancus. The name Augustus, meaning venerable or august, connected with sacred places and auspicious bird divinations, was deemed more dignified than Romulus. Augustus lost his father at age 4 and aged 12, delivered a funeral oration for his grandmother Julia. By 16, Caesar rewarded him military honors during the African triumph despite his youth. He accompanied his uncle Caesar to Spain against Pompey's sons, recovering from illness and surviving shipwreck and dangers en route. This earned Caesar's affection, recognizing his character. After Spain's conquest, Caesar planned campaigns in Dacia and Parthia but sent Augustus ahead to Apollonia to study. Learning of Caesar's murder and his appointment as heir, Augustus hesitated to call legions but deemed it rash. Returning to Rome, he claimed his inheritance despite fears and dissuasion from his mother and stepfather Philippus. Gathering a strong military force, he governed with Antony and Lepidus, then Antony alone, and finally alone for 44 years. His life involved 5 civil wars: Medina and Actium against Antony, Philippi against Brutus and Cassius, Perugia against Lucius Antonius, and Sicily against Sextus Pompeius. These wars arose from his desire to avenge Caesar's murder and secure his regime's stability. Upon returning from Apollonia, he planned surprise action against Brutus and Cassius, who escaped. He resolved to pursue legal action for Caesar's murder in their absence. When preparations to celebrate Caesar's post-Civil War victory faltered, Augustus undertook the task himself. Seeking authority, he ran for office replacing a deceased tribune, despite patrician status and no Senate membership. Antony, expected as an ally, opposed him, demanding bribes. Augustus joined the nobles' faction, seeing Sylla as distrusted for attempting to displace Decius Brutus, besieged in Medina. Plotting with rough allies to kill his opponent, the scheme failed. Fearing for his safety, Augustus secured Caesar's veterans by spreading wealth. Sent by the Senate as praetor with Hirtius and Pansa consuls to aid Decius Brutus, he ended the war after 2 battles within 3 months. Antony reportedly fled the first battle, reappearing days later without cloak or horse, but fought bravely in the second, carrying the eagle standard after the bearer was wounded. After Hirtius and Pansa's deaths, rumored orchestrated by Augustus so he could command victorious armies alone, he switched allegiances from nobles, citing insults and marginalization. To show remorse, he fined the Nursini heavily and expelled them for honoring their fallen comrades as sacrificing for liberty, acts he viewed as treasonous. Forming a triumvirate with Antony and Lepidus, Augustus ended the Philippi War despite illness. After an initial defeat and difficult escape, he reportedly sent Brutus's severed head to Caesar's statue. He treated prisoners harshly. One begged at least for burial but was told, "That will be the bird's choice." 2 prisoners, father and son, died by lot and sword, witnessed by Augustus. Captured prisoners insulted Antony and Octavius bitterly. With power divided, Antony ruled the East, Augustus settled veterans in Italy, establishing colonies on municipal lands. He earned dissatisfaction from veterans and landowners alike, accused of unfairness to both. When Lucius Antony stirred unrest, Augustus besieged him in Perugia, forcing surrender amid hardships. After a soldier took equestrian seats at public games, Augustus ordered his removal. Rumors of harsh punishment led veterans to threaten him, but the soldier soon appeared unharmed. While sacrificing near Perugia, Augustus nearly fell to gladiators' ambush. Following Perugia's fall, Augustus condemned many prisoners to death, responding to pleas with, "You must die." Some accounts detail 300 executed before an altar dedicated to Julius Caesar. Some claim the war aimed to expose enemies rallying under Lucius Antony, punish them, seize estates, and fulfill promises to veterans. Octavius Caesar Augustus soon began the Sicilian War, though it was prolonged by various delays. At times, he needed to rebuild fleets twice lost to storms, even in summer. At others, he sought peace, forced by public outcry over famine caused by Pompey's naval blockade. Finally, after constructing a new fleet and receiving 20,000 freed slaves as rowers, Augustus created the Julian harbor at Baiae by flooding the Lucrine and Avernian lakes. Training his forces through winter, he defeated Pompey between Mylae and Naulochus. Strikingly, just as the battle began, he fell into a deep sleep, requiring friends to rouse him to signal the attack. Mark Antony mocked this. You gazed at the sky lying back while Marcus Agrippa made the enemy retreat. You couldn't clearly see your own fleet. Others recalled his defiant words, I will conquer despite Neptune, after losing fleets to storms, and how he barred Neptune's statue from the subsequent games procession. Augustus took great risks in this war. Returning from transporting part of his army to Sicily, he was ambushed by Pompey's admirals Demochares and Apollophanes, escaping with only one ship. While traveling on foot through Locrian territory, mistaking Pompey's vessels for his own, he nearly fell captive. During this escape, a resentful slave of Aemilius Paulus, whose father had been proscribed, attempted to assassinate Augustus but failed. After Pompey's defeat, Augustus faced challenges from Marcus Lepidus, summoned from Africa. Lepidus, commanding 20 legions, claimed dominance threateningly. Augustus stripped him of command but spared his life, sentencing him to lifelong exile in Circeii. The fragile alliance with Antony finally collapsed. To expose Antony's betrayal, Augustus publicized Antony's will naming Cleopatra's children heirs. Though officially declared enemy, Antony's relatives and allies, including consuls Gaius Suetonius and Titus Domitius, were sent to him. Augustus praised Bologna's citizens for supporting his cause, recalling their ancestors' ties to the Antonius. He decisively defeated Antony near Actium in a naval battle lasting until late evening, afterward resting aboard ship. He wintered on the Isle of Samos, but news of mutiny among soldiers sent to Brundisium forced his return to Italy. 2 severe storms en route sank part of his Liburnian squadron and damaged his ship spars, rigging, and rudder. After settling mutinous demands at Brundisium in under a month, he journeyed through Asia and Syria to Egypt, where Antony and Cleopatra fled. Besieging Alexandria, Augustus quickly took control, drove Antony to suicide, and witnessed his corpse. He sought to save Cleopatra for a triumph and, hearing she died of asp venom, sent his Scylla specialists to attempt to suck out poison. He permitted Antony and Cleopatra to be buried together and completed their mausoleum. He forcibly captured Antony's eldest son by Fulvia, who had sought refuge by Julius Caesar's statue after pleading for his life, and executed him. Caesario, Cleopatra's son by Caesar in Augustus's view, shared his fate after capture. Antony's children by Cleopatra survived, raised with care as fitting their rank. Augustus once wished to view Alexander the Great's sarcophagus and body. After honoring the prince with a golden crown and flower offerings, he declined to see Ptolemaic tombs, saying, I wish to see a king, not dead men. He made Egypt a Roman province and undertook grand engineering to enhance Roman grain supply, clearing Nile canals long clogged with sediment. To celebrate Actium, Augustus founded Nicopolis along the coast and initiated games every 5 years. He restored and adorned an ancient temple of Apollo with naval trophies near his campsite, consecrating the place to Neptune and Mars. He quelled numerous uprisings and uncovered conspiracies targeting him, foiled before execution. Among these were plots involving younger Lepidus, Varro Murena, Fannius Scipio, Marcus Ignatius, Claudius Rufus, Lucius Paulus, Lucius Audacius, Asinius Epicatus, a Parthian, and the peculiar Telephus, a theater prompter who fancied fate destined power to him. Once, A soldier's servant carrying a hunting dagger was found outside Augustus's chamber. Whether mad or feigning madness, he confessed nothing under torture. Augustus personally led 2 foreign wars, the Dalmatian campaign as a youth, and later the Cantabrian. He suffered wounds in both, including a knee injury from a stone and injuries from a falling object. His other wars were directed by lieutenants, though he occasionally visited armies in Pannonia and Germany or stayed nearby, journeying as far as Ravenna, Milan, or Aquileia. He conquered Cantabria, Aquitania, Pannonia, Dalmatia, Illyricum, Rhaetia, and Alpine tribes, Vindelici and Salaciae. He checked Dacian incursions by defeating commanders with large armies, and moved German tribes Ubii and Sicambri into Gaul. He quelled revolts with measured justice, asserting that wars were only waged for just causes. He required rebellious chieftains to swear peace oaths in the temple of Mars the Avenger. Finding women better hostages than men, he demanded new hostages accordingly but allowed their retrieval upon request. Even traitors were punished with slavery lasting 30 years without service in adjacent lands. His reputation for virtue and moderation attracted ambassadors from India and Scythia, previously known only by report. The Parthians acknowledged his claim to Armenia, returning standards taken from Crassus and Antony, offering hostages. Later, they recognized only his chosen Armenian king. He twice closed the temple of Janus Quirinus, an honor signaling universal peace, more than anyone since Rome's founding. He celebrated 2 ovations after Philippi and Sicily, and 3 curule triumphs, Dalmatia, Actium, and Alexandria, each lasting 3 days. His armies suffered 2 notable defeats in Germany under Lieutenants Lollius and Varus. Varus's loss was devastating with 3 legions annihilated. In response, Augustus fortified city defenses and prolonged provincial prefects' terms to maintain order. He vowed grand games honoring Jupiter Optimus Maximus should fortune favor restoration. Deeply shaken by Varus's disaster, Augustus mourned with unkempt hair and violence, annually commemorating the calamity. Military reforms included strict discipline and limiting lieutenants' visits to wives to winters. When a knight maimed his sons to prevent military service, Augustus punished him by selling his property and sending him into servitude, though for a freedman's sake. He disbanded mutinous legions, withholding rewards, decimating retreating cohorts with barley, and executing deserters. Other offenders suffered shameful punishments like standing all day in minimal clothing or carrying heavy poles or turf. After the civil wars, he addressed soldiers respectfully as soldiers, stripping the more familiar fellow soldiers from usage in his army or families, seeing it as undermining discipline and his family's dignity. He avoided arming former slaves except twice for colonial security, keeping them separate under distinct standards. Military honors like collars and decorations were awarded more often than crowns, fairly and also to common soldiers. He gave Marcus Agrippa a sea-green banner after the Sicilian naval battle. Troop rewards were not granted in triumphs, as victors reserved gifts for their discretion. Augustus valued prudence, often quoting proverbs like, "Hasten slowly," and calling caution better than boldness. For a battle or war, he said, gain must outweigh risk. Pursuing small advantage with great hazard is folly. He advanced rapidly through public office, becoming consul at 20 through military pressure. In his first consulship, a centurion boldly threatened the Senate to confirm Augustus, showing sword hilt. He held his second consulship 9 years later, the third a year after, then held 11 consecutive terms. Later, though often offered office, he declined until voluntarily running for his 12th and 13th to introduce his sons Caius and Lucius to public life. Between his 6th and 11th consulships, Augustus served full years. In others, only months, once only hours, resigning and appointing substitutes. He took some offices abroad, his 4th consulship in Asia, 5th in Samos, and 8th and 9th in Tarragona. For 10 years, Augustus served as part of the triumvirate charged with stabilizing the Roman Commonwealth. Though initially opposing brutal proscriptions, he soon carried them out with harsher rigor than his colleagues. He insisted that no one be spared, even the former guardian of his father, Gaius Suetonius. After the proscriptions, when Marcus Lepidus sought leniency for the condemned, Augustus declared he owed no limits to his power. Eventually, he pardoned T. Vinius Philippemon for sheltering a proscribed man. However, his rule sparked great bitterness. Once, while giving a speech, he noticed a Roman knight covertly recording, and had him stabbed as a spy. Soldiers later tormented Tygidius Afer, the consul-elect, into jumping from a height to his death after an insult. Another praetor, Quintus Gallius, was tortured and blinded at Augustus's orders on suspicion of conspiracy, though no confession was obtained and he later died suspiciously. Augustus held tribunician power for life, but often appointed colleagues for 2 consecutive terms. He held morality oversight without the title of censor and conducted 3 censuses, the last alone. At times, Augustus considered restoring the Republic. After Antony's defeat, recalling Antony's blame for impeding this, and again during a severe illness, he favored peace. Yet he chose to retain power himself, perhaps for good or ill, stating his wish to establish the Commonwealth on a stable foundation, hoping his efforts would endure beyond his life. Urban challenges confronted him. The city, ill-built, prone to floods and fires, was vastly improved under his administration. He boasted rightly that he found Rome of brick but left it of marble. He undertook measures to prevent fires and floods, widening the Tiber's course, and repairing roads including the Flaminian Way, financed by spoils. Augustus greatly expanded public works. Temples to Mars the Avenger, Apollo on the Palatine, and Jupiter Tonans. His new forum, housing judicial courts, was opened before the Mars Temple completed, becoming a venue for trials and judges chosen by lot. The temple to Mars commemorated a vow to avenge his father's murder. The Apollo temple rose where lightning struck his property, augurously chosen by soothsayers. He added porticos, a library of Greek and Latin works, and held Senate sessions there. The Jupiter Tonans temple celebrated his escape from thunderbolts during the Cantabrian campaign. He frequently met the Senate in these sacred places. Augustus also built for family members, including the porticos of his grandsons, his wife and sister, the theater of Marcellus, and inspired others to enhance Rome's grandeur. Citizens followed, constructing temples and theaters such as those dedicated to Hercules and the Muses, Diana, Saturn, and the famous amphitheater. He restructured urban governance, dividing the city into districts managed by neighborhood wardens, establishing night watches against fires, and relieving the Tiber of blockages. He restored order along roads and removed unauthorized associations and bands of robbers. Augustus reformed legal procedures, abolishing vexatious debts, limiting suits, and restoring rights over contested lands. He organized courts, including a new tribunal for minor claims, and expanded judicial eligibility to younger men. As judge, Augustus was diligent, well into late hours, administering justice with attention and leniency. Once, sparing a murderer from horrifying punishment, he quizzed him. "You did not kill your father, did you?" In cases of forgery, he shielded those deceived in signing wills from harsh penalties. He assigned appeals involving Romans to city praetors and provincial cases to senators. Legislatively, Augustus enacted reforms on morality, adultery, bribery, and marriage incentives. When initial penalties were unpopular, he moderated restrictions, setting dowry intervals and curbing divorce abuses. He restructured the Senate, purging unworthy members added post-Caesar and reducing numbers to maintain dignity. Census methods and Senate sessions were regulated, with attendance rules and voting managed at Augustus's discretion. New laws limited publication of Senate acts, delayed provincial appointments, and reformed public finances and court procedures. He created offices to oversee infrastructure, public grain, and military matters, establishing efficient administration. Though he sought longer consul terms and more control, his proposal for multiple consuls was rejected as excessive. He was generous in rewarding military merit, granting over 30 generals the honor of a grand triumph. Beyond this, he ensured that more than that number received triumphal decorations approved by the Senate. To familiarize senators' sons early with governance, he allowed them, upon reaching manhood, to wear the senator's robe with its broad border and attend Senate debates. When they entered military service, they were given the rank of military tribune and command of auxiliary cavalry. To provide all with military experience, he typically placed 2 senators' sons in command of each cavalry troop. He revived the ancient custom of a cavalry parade for the equestrian order but forbade forcing anyone to dismount during reviews as was once customary. Elderly or disabled horsemen could send their horses ahead and come on foot to answer their names. Men aged 35 or older could relinquish their horses if they wished. With the help of 10 senators, he required each Roman knight to report on his conduct. Offenders faced punishment or were marked with infamy. Most, however, received only rebukes of varying severity. The mildest involved receiving tablets with private admonishments to be read on the spot. Some knights were disgraced for exploiting loans at usurious rates. During elections for tribunes of the people, if there were insufficient senator candidates, he nominated men from the equestrian order. After their term, these men could choose to remain in either order. Since many knights had suffered financial losses in the civil wars and feared penalties, they avoided attending public games in their reserved seats. He decreed that anyone who, or whose parents, had owned a knight's estate was exempt from these penalties. He conducted a street-by-street census and intended to issue tickets for grain distribution only 3 times a year but, at popular request, kept the monthly arrangement. He restored traditional election laws and imposed penalties to curb bribery. On election day, he gifted 1,000 sesterces each to freemen of the Fabian and Scaptian tribes, his own voting tribes, to discourage seeking favors from candidates. Dedicated to preserving Roman purity, he limited conferring Roman citizenship, granting it sparingly and restricting slave manumission. When Tiberius requested citizenship for a Greek client, he insisted the client appear personally to justify the request. He refused similar requests from others, offering tax relief instead, stating he preferred some loss over making Roman citizenship too common. He barred slaves who had been chained or tortured from ever gaining citizenship. He also sought to revive traditional Roman attire and customs, condemning a crowd wearing gray cloaks in public, exclaiming, "Rome's conquering sons, lords of the widespread globe, stalk proudly in the toga's graceful robe." He ordered officials to bar anyone from the forum or circus unless wearing the toga, not short coats. He showed generosity to all social ranks. After bringing the Egyptian king's treasure into Rome in his Alexandrian triumph, money flowed freely, lowering interest rates and raising land prices. When he later received large confiscated sums, he lent money interest-free for set terms, requiring collateral double the loan amount. He raised the property qualification for senators from 800,000 to 1,200,000 sesterces, supplementing those who fell short. His donations to the people varied from 250 to 400 sesterces, extending gifts even to boys younger than 11. During grain shortages, he sold grain at very low prices or sometimes gave it freely, doubling the number of redeemable grain tickets. He was a ruler focused more on the people's welfare than their applause. When they complained about the scarcity and cost of wine, he reminded them that his son-in-law Agrippa had provided abundant water to quench their thirst. When they demanded a promised gift, he affirmed his word. But upon persistent demands for a gift he had not promised, he scolded them for their boldness and withheld any gifts, regardless of prior intentions. He firmly restricted donatives if freed slaves exceeded numbers promised, giving less than promised to balance the total. In severe scarcity, he expelled slave troops, gladiators owned by masters, and all foreigners except doctors and scholars. Some household slaves were also dismissed. Once abundance returned, he considered ending free grain distribution altogether, believing it fostered laziness, but abandoned the idea, knowing future leaders might revive it. He ensured fair treatment for farmers and traders alongside idle citizens. His public spectacles surpassed all predecessors in number, variety, and grandeur. He personally funded games 24 times and hosted 23 more for absent or impoverished magistrates. Performances were held throughout the city, in streets, forums, amphitheaters, circuses, and specially built venues, with actors performing in many languages. Sometimes he showcased only wild beast hunts. In the Campus Martius, he arranged wrestling matches on temporary wooden stands, including naval battles in a specially dug basin near the Tiber, now the site of the Caesar's Grove. He posted city guards during these events to prevent crime while few citizens remained at home. In the circus, he staged chariot and foot races and wild beast combats often involving young nobles. His favorite were Trojan games with select boys competing in age and status groups, seen as noble training and a respected tradition. He honored Caius Nonius Asprenas, who was crippled in the games, with a gold collar and allowed his descendants to bear the surname Torquati. However, he ended these games following a harsh Senate speech mourning a boy who broke his leg. Sometimes Roman knights acted on stage or fought as gladiators until the Senate banned this practice. Afterward, he showcased only one diminutive, powerful-voiced young man named Lucius. At one spectacle, he led Parthian hostages, the first from their nation presented in Rome, through the amphitheater and seated them above himself. He also showcased unusual curiosities during quiet periods: a rhinoceros in the septa, a tiger on stage, and a 50-cubit-long snake in the comitium. Once, during games held under a vow, he became ill and had to recline on a litter. On another occasion, his curule chair broke, causing him to fall. During games held by his grandsons, he calmed frightened crowds alarmed by a false claim that the theater was collapsing, moving to the riskiest seats himself. He addressed disorder among spectators by securing Senate decrees reserving the first tier of benches at public events for senators, ensuring their dignity after an affront at Puteoli. He excluded even ambassadors of free and allied nations from orchestra seats due to disguised freed slaves filling them. Soldiers and married plebeians were assigned separate seating rows. Boys and their tutors had distinct benches. Attendees dressed in black were barred from central circle seats. Women were excluded from gladiator combats except from the uppermost theater areas, a sharp change from past mingling. Vestal virgins alone had reserved theater seats opposite the praetor. Women were forbidden from wrestling matches. One pair was postponed until the next morning with a proclamation that no woman enter the theater before 5 o'clock. He often attended the Circensian games from friends' homes or official statues' places, accompanied by his family. Sometimes he was absent for hours or days but always appointed substitutes. When present, he focused solely on the spectacles to avoid the criticism his father Caesar faced for multitasking or from genuine enjoyment. He openly praised the best performers, rewarded Greek artists, and delighted in boxing contests, both trained champions and street scrappers. He patronized all contributors to public entertainment, expanded wrestlers' privileges, and banned gladiator fights without quarter. Magistrates lost their ancient right to punish stage players anytime and anywhere, limited to misbehavior during performances. However, he demanded the highest effort from wrestlers and gladiators. He strictly disciplined performers. Stephanio, a top actor who kept a married woman disguised as a boy at his table, was whipped through all 3 theaters and banished. Hylas, a pantomime actor accused by the praetor, was scourged publicly in his own home. Pylades, for insulting a heckling spectator, was exiled from the city and Italy. Having organized Rome, He expanded Italy's population by establishing 28 colonies and improved it with public works and wise use of revenues. He granted colonies a new voting system allowing magistrates to vote remotely via sealed dispatches. He increased the ranks and families by approving cavalry service petitions based on local recommendation, and gave 1,000 sesterces to lower-class parents who brought their children to him during his visits. Important provinces needing stable management he kept under his direct rule. Others were allotted to proconsuls by lot. Some licentious allied cities lost autonomy, while indebted or earthquake-damaged cities were restored and relieved. He granted Latium or full city freedom to cities proven loyal. Except for Africa and Sardinia, he visited all provinces. He planned to pursue Sextus Pompeius in those regions but was thwarted by storms, and later, no mission required it. He returned conquered kingdoms to former rulers or gave them to foreigners. He encouraged close alliances among Rome's allied kings through marriages and friendships, treating them as empire members. Guardians were appointed for minors or lunatics among kings, and their sons were educated alongside his own. Regarding the army, he distributed legions and auxiliaries across provinces and stationed fleets at Misenum and Ravenna to guard the seas. Some forces served in the city and as his bodyguard. However, he dismissed the Spanish and German guards after key defeats. He never allowed more than 3 cohorts in Rome and maintained no praetorian camps, quartering troops nearby in camps year-round. He standardized soldiers' pay and pensions based on rank, service length, and wealth to prevent older veterans from joining uprisings. A military treasury was created with new taxes to fund pay and pensions. For early provincial news, he set up relay posts with riders along roads, eventually using couriers with fast vehicles, enabling face-to-face questioning. His seal on official documents changed from a sphinx to Alexander the Great's head, then to his own image carved by Dioscorides, an example continued by later emperors. He dated letters precisely, noting day or night hours of dispatch. His clemency and moderation were well known. Rather than punishing many opponents harshly, he fined Junius Novatus and exiled Cassius Patavinus lightly, despite their offenses, including public insults and threats against him. In one trial, when accused of calumniating Caesar, he challenged the accuser, warning he would defend his honor fiercely, and took no further action. When Tiberius complained of the insult, he advised him not to react with youthful anger or indignation, saying it sufficed if they prevented actual harm. He was aware that it was customary to dedicate temples to proconsuls, but he refused to allow any to be erected in the provinces unless they bore both his and Rome's names. Within the city itself, he outright rejected such honors. He melted down all silver statues of himself and transformed them into tripods dedicated to Palatine Apollo. When the people urged him to accept the dictatorship, he humbly knelt with his toga over his shoulders and chest exposed, begging to be excused. He always detested the title Lord, seeing it as ominous and offensive. When a play at the theater addressed him with the words, "O just and gracious Lord," and the audience applauded, he immediately stopped the flattery with a stern gesture and forbade such an address thereafter, even among his own children and grandchildren. He usually avoided receiving compliments by entering and leaving cities at night. During his consulships, he walked the streets on foot. At other times, he traveled in a closed carriage. He welcomed plebeians and nobles alike at court, treating all with such kindness that he once joked that a man was hesitant to present a petition as if offering money to an elephant. On Senate days, he greeted the consular fathers by name inside their seats, never requiring assistance, and bid them farewell as he left. He maintained close, courteous relations with many senators, attending their family celebrations until advancing age and crowds made it difficult. When Senator Gallus Tyrrhenius, suddenly blinded, threatened to starve himself, he visited and persuaded him otherwise. In Senate debates, some admitted not understanding him, others would have contradicted him if safe. When angered by heated arguments and leaving the chamber, Some senators protested that they should have freedom of speech. During a Senate election, Antistus Labeo nominated Marcus Lepidus, a former enemy of Augustus then in exile, responding to Lepidus's question about more deserving candidates with, "Every man has his own opinion." No one was ever punished for free speech, even when it bordered on insolence. When libels against him circulated in the Senate, he remained untroubled and did not investigate the authors. He proposed only that future offenders who published libels under false names be held accountable. Responding to provocative jokes meant to discredit him, he issued a proclamation but blocked the Senate from restricting freedom in last wills. At elections, he canvassed personally with his nominees and voted alongside the people. He endured being summoned as a witness and cross-examined with patience. While constructing his forum, he respected neighbors' property rights, refusing to confiscate land. He never recommended his sons to the people without adding, "if they deserve it." When audiences applauded his minor sons standing in the theater, he seriously objected. He wanted his friends to be powerful but not exempt from the laws. When his close friend Asprenas Nonius faced a poisoning charge, he sought the Senate's advice about standing by him, not wanting to protect guilt or abandon a friend. The Senate unanimously supported him, and he acted as advocate without the usual character defense. He also defended others, like an old soldier suing for slander. He intervened only once to stop a prosecution, when the accuser of a conspiracy was persuaded in court to drop charges. His admirable conduct made him deeply beloved. The Senate's honors may have seemed compelled, but Roman knights celebrated his birthday for 2 days each year. All social ranks annually threw money into the Curtian lake as a vow for his welfare. On January 1st, gifts were presented in the Capitol to which he bought costly statues of gods like Apollo Sandalarius and Jupiter Trigetus, placing them throughout Rome. When fire damaged his Palatine house, veterans, judges, tribes, and individuals collected funds for rebuilding, but he accepted only a small portion and refused donations exceeding a single denarius per person. On return from provinces, receptions included joyful songs, and punishments were paused whenever he entered the city. The people unanimously offered him the title Father of his country, first at Antium. When he declined, they repeated the offer in a full theater crowned with laurels. The Senate soon officialized the title by commissioning M. Messala to congratulate him, expressing wishes for his and the state's enduring happiness. With tears, Augustus replied, "Having attained the summit of my wishes, what else do I ask of the immortal gods but the continuance of your affection until my life's end?" A statue was erected for the physician Antonius Musa near Aesculapius after curing Augustus. Some families ordered heirs to make offerings at the Capitol with tablets declaring, "Because Augustus still survived." Italian cities marked the day of his first visit as their new year. Most provinces erected temples, altars, and instituted games every 5 years in his honor. His allied kings built cities named Caesarea in his honor and collectively pledged to complete and dedicate the temple of Jupiter Olympus at Athens to his genius. These kings often laid aside royal insignia, donning the toga to attend him daily as clients both in Rome and on his provincial tours. Having outlined his public service in civil and military roles, and governance in peace and war, now his private life will be recounted. He lost his mother during his first consulship and his sister Octavia at age 54, treating them with great kindness in life and honoring their memory after death. He was betrothed young to Publius Servilius Isauricus's daughter, but, after reconciling with Antony, married Antony's stepdaughter Claudia to seal alliances, though she was barely marriageable. Following conflicts with her mother Fulvia, he divorced Claudia, a pure virgin. He then married Scribonia, twice widowed of consular rank, but parted ways due to her difficult temper. Finally, he married Livia Drusilla, already pregnant, who remained his beloved companion. With Scribonia he had a daughter, Julia. None with Livia despite longing for children, she once miscarried. Julia was first married to Marcellus, his sister's son, then to Marcus Agrippa after Marcellus's death, the latter being married at the time to Marcellus's sister with children. After Agrippa's death, he considered various matches for Julia before settling on Tiberius, who parted from his pregnant wife for the marriage. Mark Antony noted Julia's prior contracts to Augustus's son and then to King Cotiso of the Gedi, with marriage proposals exchanged. He had 3 grandsons from Agrippa and Julia, Caius, Lucius, and Agrippa, and 2 granddaughters, Julia and Agrippina. Julia married Lucius Paulus, son of the censor. Agrippina married Germanicus, his sister's grandson. Caius and Lucius were adopted through formal purchase, advanced young to state offices, and sent as consuls-elect to provinces and armies. He trained his daughter and granddaughters in household tasks and compelled open speech before the family to record their behavior. He strictly forbade contact with strangers, once writing to Lucius Vinicius, reproaching him for visiting his daughter at Baiae. He personally taught his grandsons reading, swimming, and other basics and worked to perfect their handwriting. They were always present at his table and traveled only with him. Despite his hopes, misfortune struck. Both Julius, daughter and granddaughter, indulged in scandalous immorality and were banished. Caius and Lucius died within 18 months, one in Lycia, the other in Marseilles. He adopted his remaining grandson Agrippa and stepson Tiberius by law, but soon confined Agrippa to Sorrentum for a wild temper, supported by a Senate decree for life imprisonment. He bore the deaths with patience but was deeply shamed by his daughter's disgrace, delivering the news to the Senate through a quaestor. He even contemplated her death. When a freedwoman and confidante named Phoebe hanged herself, he remarked, "I would rather be Phoebe's father than Julia's." In exile, Julia was denied wine, luxury, and male attendants without his approval, under strict surveillance of their age and marks. After 5 years, she was moved from the island to the mainland under lighter conditions but never recalled. Despite public pleas for mercy, he replied, "I wish you had daughters and wives like her." The child born to his granddaughter Julia after her sentencing was neither recognized nor raised by him. Agrippa's madness worsened. He was exiled under guard to an island, sentenced for life. Whenever they were mentioned, Augustus sighed and quoted, "Eighth ophalon agamos te emini, agonos te Hippolytae. Would I were wifeless, or had childless died." He usually called them his 3 impisthomes or cancers. Careful in friendships, he showed great loyalty, rewarding virtues and enduring minor faults. Few fell from grace, except Salvidianus Rufus and Cornelius Gallus, men of humble origin whom he raised high. One's rebellion led to condemnation by the Senate. The other, for insubordination, was banished from Rome and provinces. When Gallus took his own life, Augustus mourned him, lamenting that only he could not respond to friends' failings as he wished. Most friends prospered in power and wealth despite occasional flaws. He occasionally chided Agrippa for rashness and Maecenas for gossiping. Agrippa retired to Mytilene over jealousy of Marcellus's favor. Maecenas trusted his wife with conspiracy secrets. He expected loyal proof even at death. Though never covetous and refusing stranger legacies, he was sensitive to how friends mentioned him in wills, chagrined by slight or omission, joyful with grateful words. Legacies left by parents were usually restored to their children at maturity or marriage, often with interest. As a patron and master, his demeanor was generally mild and conciliatory, yet he could be severe when necessary. He promoted many freedmen to positions of honor and importance, like Licinus and Enceladus. When his slave Cosmus spoke bitterly against him, he merely put him in chains. After his steward Diomedes abandoned him to a wild boar attack while walking together, he saw this as cowardice rather than betrayal and even joked about the danger. However, he executed Proculus, a favored freedman, for illicit affairs with other men's wives, and broke the legs of his secretary Thallus for taking a bribe to reveal a letter's contents. When attendants of his son Caius abused their power during his illness and death, he punished them harshly by tying heavy weights to their necks and throwing them into a river. In his youth, he faced many vicious accusations. Sextus Pompey called him effeminate, Mark Antony claimed he earned his adoption through prostitution, and Lucius Antony alleged he submitted for money in Spain and even singed his legs to soften hair. Crowds in the theater insulted him with allusions to a Gallic priest, mocking him wildly. Even his friends admitted he committed adultery but argued it was for political intelligence, not lust. Antony accused him of taking a consular wife from a banquet to bed and returning her disheveled, divorcing Scribonia over a mistress's influence, and using friends as pimps who forced women to undress as if for slave auctions. Before falling out with Antony, he wrote mockingly about his affairs, challenging Antony on his own. One notorious private dinner, the Supper of the 12 Gods, where guests dressed as deities and he played Apollo, sparked scandal. Anonymous verse condemned the event as an impious display of wine and lust during a famine, leading to a popular saying that the gods ate all the corn, and that he was Apollo the tormentor, a god worshipped negatively in part of the city. He was also accused of vanity in fine furniture and gambling, supposedly placing enemies on proscription lists to seize precious items. Epigrams mocked him for losing fleets but gambling constantly. He easily disproved charges of impurity by his lifelong chastity during those accusations and later. His austerity in furnishings was clear when, after Alexandria's capture, he kept only a porcelain cup and melted all royal gold vessels. Yet he reportedly continued seducing young girls, even arranged by his wife. He disregarded criticism of his gambling, playing publicly into old age and generously losing and giving away stakes, sometimes for tens of thousands of sesterces. He lived modestly, first near the Roman Forum, later on the Palatine in a small, unremarkable house lacking marble or grandeur. He used the same bedchamber for 40 years, noting city winters were bad for his health but remaining there regardless. For true privacy, he retreated to a top-floor room he called Syracuse or Technophuen, or nearby villas of freedmen. When ill, he stayed in Maecenas' house. He favored coastal retreats and towns near Rome like Lanuvium and Tibur, where he often judged disputes in temple porticos. He disliked large palaces, demolishing some his granddaughter Julia built lavishly. His own homes featured groves and curiosities like giant bones and hero arms rather than statues. His simplicity extended to furniture, using rough beds and tables suitable for private families, never lavish. He wore clothes mostly made by his female relatives, with togas of moderate style and shoes slightly elevated to appear taller. He kept ready public clothes and shoes at hand for sudden appearances. At his table, always ample and elegant, he was selective about guests, admitting few freedmen but Minos, a notable exception rewarded for betraying Pompey. He sometimes invited a former spy living in his villa. Often arriving late and leaving early, meals were brief but marked by lively courtesy and encouragement for quiet guests to join conversation. Buffoons, actors, circus performers, and traveling comedians frequently enlivened the company. He celebrated festivals lavishly or simply. During Saturnalia or whim, he gave guests clothes, gold, silver, ancient coins, or strange gifts like towels and sponges with cryptic tickets. He sometimes held lotteries selling items of uneven value, amusing or disappointing patrons unpredictably. He ate sparingly, favoring simple foods such as coarse bread, small fish, fresh cow cheese, and green figs that fruit twice a year. He did not wait for formal supper but ate whenever hungry, sometimes alone before or after company. His letters describe eating bread and dates in his carriage or light snacks after baths, revealing his indifference to strict dining schedules. He drank wine very moderately, about 3 times per supper at most, favoring Rhaetian wine at night and rarely in daylight. Instead of wine, he often drank cold water, ate cucumber slices, lettuce, or tart green apples. He typically rested after a light midday meal, dressed and with shoes on, covering his feet and shielding his eyes with his hand. After supper, he retired to a small study to write down the day's transactions before sleeping no more than 7 hours, often waking multiple times. If unable to sleep again, he called for stories until drowsy. He disliked lying alone in the dark and needed company. Early rising troubled him, so for morning duties, he stayed near the venue. On streets, if overcome by sleep, his litter was set down for brief naps. Physically, he was handsome and graceful throughout life but careless about dressing and grooming, often having multiple barbers cut his hair hastily. He sometimes clipped or shaved his beard while reading or writing. His calm, serene expression was so powerful that a Roman noble from Gaul refrained from harming him during Alpine passage. His bright, piercing eyes conveyed a sense of divine vigor, and people often lowered their gazes when he fixed his stare. In old age, he had poor vision in his left eye. His teeth were small and sparse, hair slightly curled and turning yellowish. His eyebrows met, ears were small, and he had a prominent, hooked nose. His complexion was between brown and fair, stature short but well-proportioned, appearing taller beside others. He was reportedly born with spots on his chest and belly resembling stars in the Bear constellation. He had calluses from frequent use of the strigil, causing itching. His left hip, thigh, and leg were weak, causing him to limp. Sand and reeds helped remedies. Sometimes his right index finger weakened and stiffened from cold, so he used a hornpiece to write. He suffered occasional bladder complaints but found relief after passing stones. Throughout life, he suffered dangerous illnesses, especially after Cantabria's conquest when liver inflammation left him gravely ill, requiring cold treatments directed by Antonius Musa. He also experienced yearly sickness near his birthday, spring midriff inflation, and colds with southern winds. These ailments weakened his constitution, making him sensitive to heat and cold. In winter, he protected himself from harsh weather with a thick toga, for tunics, a shirt, a flannel stomacher, and wrappings on his legs and thighs. In summer, he slept with his bedroom doors open, often on a piazza refreshed by a bubbling fountain and a servant fanning him. He could not tolerate even the winter sun and never walked outside at home without a broad-brimmed hat. He usually traveled by litter at night, taking 2 days to reach nearby towns like Praeneste or Tibur. When possible, he preferred sea travel. He meticulously cared for his health, especially avoiding excessive baths, but frequently rubbed himself with oil and sweated in saunas before washing with lukewarm water warmed by fire or sun. For his nerves, he sometimes used sea water or waters from Albula, sitting over wooden tubs, immersing his hands and feet in turn. After the civil wars, he abandoned horseback riding and military drills, playing ball or football briefly before settling for walks or riding in a litter. Near the end of his walk, wrapped in a short cloak, he would leap and run. He amused himself by fishing or playing dice, pebbles, or nuts with boys from varied lands, particularly Moors and Syrians, chosen for their beauty or wit. He despised dwarfs and the deformed, seeing them as unnatural and bad omens. From youth, he studied eloquence and liberal arts with great diligence. During the Medina War, despite heavy responsibilities, he read, wrote, and practiced speeches daily. He never addressed the Senate, people, or army without prepared speeches, though adept at impromptu speaking. To guard his memory and save time, he typically recited speeches. In private, even with his wife Livia, he wrote important points on tablets to avoid improper extemporaneous remarks. His delivery was soft and distinct, trained by a master of elocution. When ill, he sometimes employed a herald for public speeches. He wrote various prose works, reading some to friends, including his rescript to Brutus about Cato. Though elderly, he read most pages himself, giving Tiberius the rest. He also shared his exhortations to philosophy and history of his life, covering 13 books up to the Cantabrian War. He attempted poetry, leaving a hexameter Sicily, and a book of epigrams, some composed in the bath. He began a tragedy but destroyed it in disappointment, joking that his hero Ajax met a sponge. His style was neat and pure, avoiding frivolous, harsh, or obsolete words he found repellent. He aimed for perfect clarity and added prepositions or repeated conjunctions to prevent confusion and add grace. He despised affected or archaic language. He often joked with his friend Maecenas for fancy phrases and mocked Tiberius's fondness for obscure expressions. Sarcastically writing to Mark Antony, he mocked his linguistic affectations and excessive verbosity. Praising his granddaughter Agrippina, he advised her against affected language. In everyday speech, he used unique phrases like, "They will pay at the Greek kalends for never paying debts," and "let us be content with our Cato to counsel patience." He habitually miswrote words in letters, such as substituting bacillus for fool, and never varied these errors, ruling out accidental slips. He never split words at line ends but wrote letters vertically within brackets. He did not strictly follow grammarian spelling rules, favoring writing as people spoke. Critics called these errors vulgar, but he thought otherwise. When writing in cipher, he replaced letters systematically, such as B for A, C for B, and AA for Z. He loved Greek literature, progressing well under Apollodorus of Pergamus, whom he brought from the city when young. Later, with philologist Zephyrus and philosopher Arius and his sons in his household, he studied Greek but never spoke it fluently or composed it. He preferred expressing himself in Latin and having others translate. He admired Greek poetry and ancient comedy, often staging their plays publicly. He carefully studied Greek and Latin authors, extracting useful lessons for public and private life, sharing them with soldiers, governors, magistrates, and even the Senate, promoting moral examples like Quintus Metellus's orations on marriage and Rutilius's on architecture. He patronized contemporary geniuses patiently, hearing poetry, history, and speeches without impatience. He disliked frivolous writings about himself, ordering praetors to prevent excessive use of his name in theatrical contests. He greatly feared thunder and lightning, always carrying a seal's skin for protection. At storm warnings, he sought shelter in underground vaults, once nearly killed by a lightning strike while traveling at night. He took his and others' dreams seriously. At Philippi, though ill and intending not to leave his tent, a friend's dream warned him, so he joined the battle. His bed was pierced by the enemy, presumed to be him. He often had strange or frightening dreams in spring, fewer and more meaningful at other times. Visiting a temple of Jupiter Tonans, he dreamt Jupiter Capitolinus complained of losing worshippers. He responded he only gave Jupiter the Thunderer as a porter, so he hung little bells atop the temple like those on wealthy homes. Due to another dream, he begged alms on a certain day annually, holding out his hand for donations. Some omens he counted as infallible. Putting on his left shoe before the right portended disaster. Starting a journey in mizzling rain signaled a safe, swift return. He paid close attention to unusual natural events. He transplanted a palm tree that grew by his house entrance into the household god's courtyard and nurtured it on Capri. Drooping branches of an old ilex revived upon his arrival, delighting him so much he exchanged the island of Anaria, Ischia, for Capri. He avoided starting serious business on certain days like the nones, only disliking its unlucky name. He respected ancient foreign religious rites but held newer ones in no regard. Though initiated at Athens, when attending a court case about priests of Attic Ceres, he dismissed all but the judges and heard sacred arguments himself. Conversely, while traveling in Egypt, he declined visits to Apis and praised his grandson Caius for not worshipping in Jerusalem. Omen and prodigy stories surrounded his birth and life. Once a part of Velletri's wall was struck by thunder. Soothsayers predicted someone from there would rule. an omen that forewarned their doomed wars with Rome but proved true with Augustus. Julius Mara thus reported a Roman prodigy before his birth, signaling that nature labored to bring forth a Roman king. The frightened Senate resolved no child born that year would be raised, but expectant mothers of potential heirs secretly prevented this decree being recorded. Asclepiades the Mendesian wrote that Asia, his mother, while attending a midnight ritual in Apollo's temple, fell asleep and was visited by a serpent. On waking, she found a serpent-shaped birthmark she could never erase and thereafter avoided public baths. Augustus was born 10 months later, believed to be Apollo's son. Before delivery, Asia dreamed her womb stretched to the heavens. His father Octavius dreamed a sunbeam from his wife's womb. On his birthday, as the Senate debated Catilin's conspiracy, Octavius arrived late due to his wife's labor. Publius Nigidius declared the world had gained a master. Later, when Octavius consulted the oracle of Bacchus in Thrace about his son, priests saw an extraordinary flame rising higher than any before, like at Alexander the Great's sacrifice. That night, Octavius dreamt his son appeared divine, crowned and chariot like Jupiter Optimus Maximus. As an infant, Augustus once disappeared from his cradle, later found atop a high tower facing the sunrise. He reportedly ordered noisy frogs on the family estate silenced, and they have never croaked since. While dining, an eagle took bread from his hand, hovered high, and unexpectedly returned it. Quintus Catulus dreamt 2 nights consecutively after dedicating the Capitol. First, he saw Jupiter place the public seal in a boy's bosom. The next night, Jupiter commanded the boy be raised as guardian of the state. Meeting Augustus soon after, Catulus recognized him as that boy. Some versions say Jupiter picked a boy among noble youths requesting a guardian, kissed the boy, and marked him. Marcus Cicero once told friends of a dream where a youth descended by golden chain holding Jupiter's whip at the Capitol's door. Seeing Augustus unknown to many, he said he was that youth. When Augustus first wore the man's toga, his senator's tunic loosened and fell to his feet, believed to foresee his eventual control over the Senate. Julius Caesar, cutting wood near Munda, preserved a palm tree as a victory omen. A sucker sprouted, rapidly growing taller and sheltering wild pigeons, a bird known to avoid rough leaves. Some say Caesar chose Augustus as heir inspired by this sign. In his retirement at Apollonia, Augustus visited the astrologer Theogenes on his rooftop gallery with his friend Agrippa. Agrippa first consulted the fates and received predictions of great fortune. Augustus hesitated to reveal his birth details, partly out of shame and fear that his fortunes might seem less than Agrippa's. Eventually persuaded, Theogenes rose to honor him. Soon after, Augustus confidently published his horoscope and minted a silver coin bearing the sign of Capricorn, under which he was born. Returning from Apollonia after Caesar's death, a rainbow-like circle appeared around the sun on a bright day, followed by lightning striking Julia's tomb, Caesar's daughter. During his first consulship, 12 vultures appeared during augury, as with Romulus, and sacrificial livers showed an inward fold at the bottom, a sure sign of great fortune. He foresaw the outcomes of his wars. At Bologna, an eagle on his tent drove away 2 attacking crows, signaling discord among the triumviri, which came true. At Philippi, a Thessalian prophet, claiming divine guidance, assured him of victory. At Perugia, unfavorable sacrifices led him to order new victims. When enemies unexpectedly seized the entrails, augurs predicted calamities would befall them, and it did. Before a sea battle near Sicily, a fish leapt onto his feet. At Actium, en route to battle, an ass named Nikon appeared, driven by a man called Eutychus. After victory, Augustus honored them with statues near his camp. His death and deification were foretold by signs. During a census in a crowded Campus Martius, an eagle circled him, then settled on the letter A on a nearby temple's nameplate, interpreted as a sign for his successor Agrippa. At the same time, lightning struck the first letter of his name on a statue, signaling he had about 100 days to live and would become a god, Caesar in Etruscan meaning. Though planning to accompany Tiberius to Illyricum, he left early despite other obligations, an omen of his death, and set out by night with favorable winds. His illness began with diarrhea, yet he toured Campania and nearby islands, spending days on Capri, indulging in rest. Passing Puteoli, Alexandrian sailors in white garbed with incense praised him. Pleased, he gifted each 40 gold pieces on the condition they be spent on Alexandrian goods. He later distributed to Romans and Greeks clothing to encourage mutual adoption of dress and language. He enjoyed watching boys exercise in the ancient Capri custom, even allowing and encouraging spirited play among them. He nicknamed an island the City of the Doolittles for its idle inhabitants and playfully composed verses about a deceased favorite, Mascabas, creating light-hearted verses extemporaneously. Despite bowel issues, he attended gymnastic games honoring him every 5 years in Naples, traveling with Tiberius. Increasing illness forced a stop in Nola for private talks, after which he ceased business. On his death day, he asked if any trouble had arisen due to him, prepared himself by grooming, and asked friends if he had played his life's role well, inviting applause if so. Dismissing them, he inquired about Drusus's sick daughter, then died gently in Livia's arms, bidding her farewell. His only symptom before death was a sudden fright, complaining he was carried by 40 men, later seen as an omen since precisely 40 soldiers carried his body. He died where his father died, aged 75. His remains were carried at night through towns from Nola to Bovilli, lying temporarily in basilicas or temples. At Bovilli, the equestrian order escorted the body to his house. The Senate zealously arranged honors, proposing public funeral processions, mourning ritual changes, and calendar renaming, but ultimately chose moderation. 2 orations praised him before the temple of Julius and the Rostra. Senators bore his body to the Campus Martius for cremation. A Praetorian soldier swore he saw his spirit ascend to heaven. Equestrians gathered his ashes in the mausoleum he built with groves and walks for the people. A will made 16 months earlier, partly in his handwriting, was kept by Vestal virgins and opened with 3 codicils. He named Tiberius inheriting 2/3 and Livia 1/3, both to take his name. Remainder heirs included Drusus, Germanicus, and his sons, with further provisions for relatives and friends. He left generous legacies to the Roman people, tribes, military units, and soldiers, specifying payment schedules. He detailed that his estate, smaller than expected despite earlier inheritances, had mainly supported the state. He forbade burial of his disgraced daughter and granddaughter in his tomb. His codicils included funeral instructions, a summary of his acts for inscription, and an account of the empire's status. With Augustus's rise, the state reached the power once held by Julius Caesar. Though he seized power violently, he maintained it with near-constant peace. War had softened the public's resistance to autocracy. Augustus, wise and cautious, learned from Julius's fate to hold supreme power without claiming hated honors. He modestly declined public praise, avoided personal aggrandizement, and governed with a moderation that promised peace and prosperity. He lent money at low or no interest, staged the popular games, but guarded government dignity and moral order. He reduced the Senate from an inflated 1,000 members, a result of Civil War adoptions, to a legal 600 and revived the censor's role to control conduct, capable of degrading senators or knights for immorality. His policy of frequent grain distributions and occasional gifts secured public favor, preventing unrest fueled by food shortages. He also prioritized the army's interests, key to his ascent and ultimate power retention. After Antony's defeat, Augustus consulted Agrippa and Maecenas on restoring the Republic. Agrippa favored it. Maecenas opposed it. This debate, possibly the most consequential in imperial history, demanded great wisdom but risked destabilizing public order. Republicans outnumbered imperialists, likely to push for restoration. The Praetorian Guard, Augustus's protector, might have been swayed by Republican intrigues. If Augustus faithfully accepted the council's verdict, Republican restoration likely would have passed. If he secretly influenced results, public hatred and insecurity could have followed. Submitting such a critical question to a large impartial assembly likely neither pleased Augustus nor, in his view, ensured his personal safety. To gain unconstitutional power, he had previously abandoned the Republican cause when it prospered. Now, having achieved his goal after years of costly struggle, little reason existed to believe he would willingly give up the prize. After Antony's defeat at Actium, he ruled Rome with absolute authority. Although unlimited power can intoxicate and harm public and private virtue, history offers no evidence that such power is generally unpalatable to people. Two motives guided Augustus's decision: love of power and fear for personal safety. Either alone could justify holding on to power. Together, their force was overwhelming. While his desire for power is unquestionable, his fear of personal danger as a private citizen also mattered. Earlier, after Julius Caesar's death, he sided with Republicans but later joined Antony and Lepidus in their bid to seize total control. This involved opposing the legal government, essentially treason against elected consuls, punishable by death. Yet such danger could be avoided by a formal amnesty from Senate and people before abdication, which they likely would have granted unanimously. So legal risk was minimal. However, private vengeance posed a greater threat. The triumvirate's bloody proscriptions left deep wounds. Victims' families might seek deadly vengeance. Though Augustus might not be assassinated publicly like Julius Caesar, he risked attack elsewhere. Still, similar crimes committed by Sulla had not prevented him from retiring peacefully, and Augustus's later secure life suggests fears were exaggerated. Setting aside personal motives, the political arguments for and against restoring the Republic warrant examination. History's records are incomplete, but general principles remain. Advocates for Republican restoration argued Rome had prospered under the Republic for over 460 years. They believed this form best secured national greatness and popular liberty, fostering public virtue by closely binding individual and community interests. The Roman people's habits were deeply attached to this long-established government and would resist permanent rule by one, striving to regain freedom. Though mild despotism might surpass a faction-ridden republic, putting absolute power in the hands of a sole individual without legal checks was a dangerous experiment. Overall, elected magistrates provided safer guardianship than any lifelong ruler. Proponents of despotism pointed to the republic's vulnerability to violent popular unrest and aristocratic factionalism, threatening ruin. A republic suited only a people whose land division prevented dangerous elite dominance. It demanded simple lives and strict morals, rarely sustained amid great wealth. Rome's vast conquests, rich provinces, war spoils, and abuses had enriched families, making aristocratic tyranny likely even if republican forms remained. The Commonwealth required a strong, energetic ruler with unchecked executive power to prevent such tyranny or chaos. As Rome matured under 6 princes, so only a similar government could now save it from aristocratic or anarchical ruin. Whichever side sounds stronger, it seems Augustus's choice stemmed more from instinct and bias than reason. Reportedly torn between advisors Agrippa and Maecenas, he sought Virgil's counsel. Virgil and Maecenas advised retaining imperial power as best suited the times. Agrippa and Maecenas were Augustus's key ministers then, seemingly his sole cabinet members over his reign. Agrippa, of humble origin, gained renown for military skill, defeating Sextus Pompey, aiding victories at Philippi and Actium, and excelling in Gaul and Germany. He declined triumph honors, preferring to spend funds on magnificent Roman buildings such as the Pantheon. Following a falling out with Marcellus, Augustus's nephew, Agrippa retired briefly but was recalled. He married Pomponia, then one of Augustus's nieces, and later Julia, Augustus's daughter, cementing alliances. When Augustus toured Greece and Asia, he entrusted empire governance to Agrippa, who was much beloved and mourned at death. Agrippa left 3 sons and 2 daughters by Julia. Maecenas, of Tuscan royal descent, remained within the equestrian order despite favor, content with controlling Rome and Italy. Known as sociable and urbane, he likely adhered to Epicureanism and appeared effeminate. Though his political talents remain uncertain, his close counsel to Augustus during the empire's formative years suggests considerable ability. Maecenas was a generous patron of the arts, celebrated in the writings of Virgil and Horace, who warmly praised him as their glory and patron. Their familiar and affectionate verses suggest he was as admirable privately as publicly. The poetic praise Augustus inspired served more than vanity. He aimed to rule hearts as well as realms. Both he and Maecenas valued poetry's power, seeking to enlist the muses to support imperial authority. Maecenas recruited poets like Propertius to glorify Augustus. Since his grandsons Caius and Lucius were young heirs, fostering literary adulation helped secure peaceful succession. This political use of poetry, countering dissent through praise, proved a novel but influential tactic. At Augustus's time, the empire stretched prodigiously, from the Euphrates in the east to the Atlantic in the west, from Africa's deserts and Mount Atlas in the south to the Danube and Rhine in the north, covering most known lands. Romans appropriately called themselves masters of the world, rerum domini, and Rome was the most beautiful and greatest of things. Even historians like Livy and Tacitus praised the capital. Later emperors largely respected Augustus's borders, though Trajan extended control into Mesopotamia, Armenia, Dacia, and Britain. Estimating Roman revenues under Augustus is difficult without detailed records, impossible in ancient states. However, vast sums came from many prosperous nations with splendid civilization and commerce. Roman citizens paid heavy tributes supporting the government, which increased during his time. Provincial administration and military expenses were mostly provincial responsibilities. The emperor maintained a modest navy and had no diplomatic costs. Huge tax wealth concentrated in Rome, fully controlled by Augustus. Hence, Augustus's revenues outstripped previous rulers, a treasure that, if wisely used, could greatly benefit public welfare, though later squandered and abused. Notably, Augustus's reign marks the birth of Christianity's savior, inaugurating a new era in history and chronology. An overview of culture and knowledge at this period is timely here. At this time, civilization extended farther than ever before, covering Europe, Asia, and Africa, with increased commercial connections. Yet, polytheism grew rather than declined. Although philosophy flourished in places like Athens, Cyrene, and Rome, it did little to improve human morals. Socrates laid a strong foundation by emphasizing reason throughout life's order. However, later philosophers strayed into elaborate but impractical speculations. Some adopted principles contrary to reason to build their own systems. Stoics and Epicureans, though popular, were harmful to society. Other schools focused on abstract ideas, detached from practical life. Debates on truth and beauty dominated, mainly in academic seclusion. Cicero sought to return philosophy to practical virtues and social duties, but reason alone had little effect on popular morals. The main studied discipline was rhetoric, quite different from today's meaning. It prioritized skillful speaking and elaborate speech over precise ideas or appropriate expression. Varro described it as the opposite of logic, likened to an open palm versus a clenched fist. Logic, a modern educational staple, was scarcely pursued by Romans, perhaps fearing it would constrain or limit eloquence. Astronomy was known to Eastern peoples, but little cultivated by Romans. Julius Caesar relied on Alexandrian mathematician Sosigenes to reform the calendar. The solar system was poorly understood, with the sun believed to revolve around Earth until Copernicus proved otherwise centuries later. Mathematics and mechanical principles like the lever were advanced. Arithmetic was generally known. Navigation used sun and stars but lacked the magnetic compass. Geography thrived through Strabo and Mela. Progress in natural philosophy was minimal, though Virgil desired improvement. Anatomy was undeveloped. Chemistry unknown. Medicine relied on Greek texts, but remedies were mixed with superstition. Architecture flourished under Vitruvius's refined taste and imperial support. Painting, sculpture, and music were practiced but less perfected than in Greece. Common instruments included flute, lyre, and the Egyptian imported sistrum. Literature shone brightest.